listeners and now viewers. I'm Dr. Katie Grant, Risk Prevention Medico-Legal Lead here at Medical Protection, and your past host of the Real World series way back when we relaunched the channel in 2022. To keep things interesting, we'll not only be bringing you the podcasts you know and love, but when the lighting is right, we'll be delivering more of these vodcasts, basically a podcast that you can watch to see the faces behind the voices. We hope you've taken away something from that focus on speaking up on respect and well-being. It's a theme we'll revisit from time to time, as we know it's a constant challenge for members. But over the coming months, I'll be joining you on some new podcasts that will take a closer look at what an expert witness is and how you could become one. We'll hear from some up-and-coming speakers that you could tune into at our Caribbean and Hong Kong conferences. Plus, there's a few other surprises, but I'll keep quiet about them for now. As I alluded to, we'll be talking a bit more about what an expert witness is without giving too much away, about a problem we're experiencing in this area right now. Taking us through this series won't be me, but instead a good colleague of mine, Sara Grewar, Claims Team Lead in Ireland. Sara is a solicitor and a senior member of the team and handles many of our most complex and high-value claims. Sara's role is to support members dealing with claims, being their point of contact when a claim is made, and answering any questions they have and explaining the claims process and what they can expect. Sara then works with our solicitors in our Dublin office to direct the investigations and ensure that we employ the best experts and barristers to understand the claim. Sara, it's so wonderful to have you host this series for us.
Delighted to be here. Thanks, Katie.
Thanks. So now I might hand over to you to share what this podcast will be about and who you'll be talking with.
Great. Thank you. Well, thank you for joining us. Today, we're here to talk about a new campaign initiative Medical Protection has launched, and that is to support members to become expert witnesses. Now, the person that came in mind that knows this better than anyone to speak to today is my colleague, Patricia Canedo. Patri, as we know her, joined Medical Protection in 2018 and is our Policy and Public Affairs Manager, and she's also the lead on this campaign. A wee bit about Patri before I tell you about the policy. Before joining us, Patri worked in the charity sector in different external communications roles. She has not one, but 2 BA honours in Spanish philology and English philology, as well as an MA in International Studies and Diplomacy from SOAS University of London. That really gives us a good insight into 2 of her biggest passions, which are languages and politics. Outside of work, Patri and I share a few of the same interests: very long walks, agreed, shopping in Zara, always, trying new craft beers, running and training. She loses me a bit there. She loves travelling and is currently learning Arabic. She's also a qualified personal trainer and a private tutor teaching English and modern languages to children and adults. As you can see, Patri has a diverse and fascinating work life, and she's well placed to see the benefits of having lots of strings to one's bow. We're really hoping that after listening to today's podcast, you'll also be encouraged to think about adding another string to your bow, namely expert witness work. Patri, thank you so much for joining me today. The Expert Witness campaign is one that's really dear to my heart as a solicitor. I advise our members on claims that are made against them, and I cannot overstate the importance of good experts. Patri, can I turn to you? Can you explain to our members where the idea for this particular campaign came from?
Of course. Firstly, thank you so much, Sara, for the lovely introduction. It's great to be here with you. So the campaign actually came out of a conversation with our medical director and some of our in-house medical legal consultants. We talking about, in general, claims and cases we were seeing, identified that there was an issue with the quality of expert reports, and there was perhaps that transcended what Medical Protection Society had as experts, but also what the courts, the regulators, in the case of England, the family courts as well, and the civil litigation system was seeing, and that was a difficulty on obtaining good quality expert witness reports and accounts. So we decided, as a medical indemnifier, we were very well placed to start, A, raising awareness about this issue, and B, hopefully encouraging some of our members and doctors in general to take up this type of work if they wish to do so, as a way, as you mentioned on your introduction, diversifying perhaps the type of work that some of our doctors and dentists do.
Great. And I think obviously I work in the claims side of the business, and certainly we use experts a huge amount. And from my point of view, we have some excellent witnesses that we deal with, but sometimes it's the size of the pool and it's the difficulty identifying experts, because not a lot of doctors seem to take on this work as far as we can see. And from your point of view, from speaking to our various colleagues across the business, why were they concerned? What were the key issues that were coming out when they were talking to you about wanting there to be a wider pool of experts?
So I think, as you said, part of the issue was not only the quality. There are some excellent experts that we use and other solicitors, plaintiffs, regulators use, but rather there wasn't enough doctors putting themselves forward. So you ended up relying perhaps on a few over and over again. But also that created some issues, which is people retire, people finish their careers, and there was no continuity. So part of these was, or part of the discussion was precisely, do we have enough doctors in current practice that are familiar with the system that choose this line of work? And we were seeing that the majority of doctors and dentists taking up this work were perhaps later in their careers when they were more familiar with what it entailed. So we decided to create some sort of an awareness campaign about what is an expert witness, what are the duties of the expert, and what can we do to diversify and widen that pool. As you said, it's not just the quality or only the quality, but also the amount or the quantity of experts that we could go to, and so could the courts.
Yeah. And obviously from my side of things, as I said, claims are obvious why an expert witness is needed in claims. But it's not just claims that we use experts for, Patri.
No, we used experts for regulatory cases. So if a doctor sees themselves in front of the Medical Council in Ireland or the GMC, the GDC, the Dental Council, we use experts in, it's more rare, but in criminal cases too, coronial investigations, and of course the family courts as well. So there is a variety of litigation where experts can be used. There is also expert reports that might be needed, not necessarily for a claim, but rather a medical legal report that has to be written. So I think the skill of being able to give a balanced account and write a report is a useful skill, regardless of whether then it's taken forward in terms of a claim or a regulatory matter, if it needs to be done.
Exactly. I think that's a good point that you highlight about the skill that is important in terms of medical training and medical work. And certainly to circle back to being an actual expert witness, as a solicitor, what I would kind of stress to our members is that the role of the medical expert really is central in order to define whether or not care has fallen short of a reasonable standard. And that's obviously therefore important to all concerned, whether it's a claim or a regulatory matter. It's important to the family and the patient themselves. And it's obviously very important to our members and the doctors who are involved in that. And so it really is important that all parties can access appropriately trained and experienced doctors for them, as you said, Patri, to give that balanced and fair view on the work of their peers. That's what the legal profession relies on the medical profession to tell us what is an appropriate standard effectively.
That's part of why this started. I mean, at the end of the day, an expert report, and you know it better than me as a solicitor yourself, it can determine whether a claim or a regulatory matter goes forward or gets closed. So it can give families, patients, and doctors and dentists an early closure, saving also the taxpayer a considerable amount of money. So actually, it's good for everyone involved, for all parties involved, that the expert report is of the best quality that it can be from the very onset of a claim or a regulatory matter, as we were discussing.
Indeed. And so, as you've said, it doesn't surprise me at all that this campaign came about from conversations with our colleagues across the business, talking, as you say, both about some quality concerns about perhaps the demographic and the age of experts and the size of the pool that's available to us. So obviously you had the task of taking that forward. So what research did you undertake, and what were some of the key learnings when you went and looked into, was this just our impression within the business, or was that borne out by the research that you undertook?
So I think it was corroborated definitely by the research. In the case of the UK, we started by the two most recent reviews, the Williams review into gross negligence manslaughter carried out in 2018 by Sir Norman Williams, and the 2019 review by Leslie Hamilton and culpable homicide commissioned by the GMC. So those two reviews had revealed issues around the recruitment and the transparency of experts, and had some very clear recommendations, including obviously better transparency around the recruitment of experts, but also how experts should be in active clinical practice and should give an account of their specialty. So they should limit perhaps their reports to those specialties that they feel they have sufficient experience in. And then in the case of Ireland, it was perhaps a bit trickier, as there wasn't perhaps medical reviews carried out, but rather the Law Reform Commission was the body in charge of having carried out some reviews with regards to the training and the quality of experts. One was in 2008, and the second one was in 2016. And in this case, it actually not only went to issue some recommendations around the training of experts, saying that there was no standardized approach, but also it mentioned the topic of hired guns or conscious bias as something that was problematic, and it was occurring perhaps more often than not in Ireland. So I think the 4 reviews probably told us something we were already suspecting from our experiences in dealing with claims, criminal and regulatory cases, but it was definitely a useful starting point of that research that we could go back to when writing our own recommendations in the reports.
Great. And when writing the recommendations, obviously we have a lot of medical professionals within our organisation. What were some of the challenges that you were hearing about in terms of why doctors weren't taking on this type of work?
I think the barriers were considerable and different. As a linguist myself, I was really interested, and so were some of our colleagues, on whether the word expert itself posed an issue. So are doctors almost put off by the word expert? Do you want to be called an expert? What is an expert in the end? How many years should you be in practice before being considered an expert? So there were a lot of almost rhetorical questions around, is expert itself a problem to become an expert? And I think in the case of the UK, part of the barrier was definitely the lack of familiarity with the system, with the legal system, but also an understanding of what expert witness work means, entails, and your duties as an expert. There is another issue, which is the training provided is generally provided by private third parties. So there is perhaps not as much knowledge or a standardized approach with a central register or a list of experts where everyone can access, everyone can go to, and it's clear that there are different specialisms in medicine that do expert work. In the case of Ireland, I think there was an added to that, which is the size of the country. It's a smaller country, so there might be more issues around, do I want to give an account of somebody else's work when you might know that other doctor? And I think perhaps demystifying the fact that being an expert is only giving a balanced account of the standard of care that is expected. It's not about giving a positive or a negative review of something, it's just giving a balanced view. I think that was perhaps the biggest challenge, reframing almost what is to be an expert witness within the parameters that obviously were legally possible to do so.
Yeah. And it's interesting that you say that, as you say, smaller jurisdictions, perhaps concerns about, do you want to comment on a colleague's care? But I think, as we said earlier on, it's really important to the profession and those who end up needing our support and assistance. You know, they're looking for colleagues to step up and to take on this work. And often, I think you alluded to earlier on, what we're looking for is people who are in current practice. And did that come out as one of the key issues when you were looking at this topic as well?
It was, and it was possibly one of the most contentious issues too. I think it's fair to say that they're great experts and they're great doctors and dentists that are writing reports towards the end of their careers or even after having retired, and that's perfectly fine. But I think we were seeing that lack of continuity of perhaps the younger generation of doctors and dentists taking up this work. So the Hamilton and Williams review in the UK recommended that doctors should be in active clinical practice to take up expert work. Yeah. And we seconded that review, we reinforced that review. Now, the second question we had to ask ourselves is, how many years should one be in practice? And it's very difficult to establish that. You know, in our dental colleagues, for example, said, no, you've got to be, you know, a few years practicing dentistry in order to understand the profession appropriately. In a medical training is a bit different. So once one person joins the GP register or the consultant register and has been practicing for 2, 3, 4 years, you can already start probably giving expert reports. So arriving to that conclusion of how do we not discourage the great doctors that are already giving expert evidence while encouraging perhaps a wider pool, a more diverse pool, and the younger generations to take up that work was one of the trickiest parts of the campaign and one of the maybe more difficult recommendations to actually nail down, I'll say.
Yeah. And so that maybe leads us nicely into, so what are some of the key recommendations and where is this campaign going? What are the next steps?
So I think that the four main aims of the campaign was, the first one, as I've said, to encourage a wider and more diverse pool of doctors, and I'll go into details of that diversity piece perhaps a bit later. The second one was to ensure that there was a register or a list of experts. So there have been calls in the UK for years about having a single register, and that calls has been placed on different bodies that are unable to take up that work. We thought that perhaps in the case of the UK, NHS trusts could be better placed to actually have a list or a register of those who have undertaken expert training and wish to put themselves forward as experts in their own area. In the case of Ireland, we decided that the HSE was perhaps better placed to do that. And the third recommendation was tackling that issue of training of experts. So again, there are many training providers, there are private and there are great training providers, but we thought the HSE in their HSE Land Online module could have also a module of expert witness training that could encourage perhaps more of those consultants and GPs to take up that work. So we thought everyone that does that module could then be on that list from HSE, and then everyone, the courts, plaintiffs, solicitors, could access that list of those who have undergone that training. And the fourth recommendation, and perhaps one of the key ones, is around the issue of system issues and human factors. So I think we've known now for a few years that it's rare that the actions of a single clinician can lead to an adverse outcome. Surely there are some cases in which that's the case, but in general, there is more than that contributes to an adverse outcome, whether that is IT failures, whether that is shortage of staff, whether that is competing patients to treat at a certain moment of time. So we thought that part of these policy paper and policy work should be to encourage those writing expert reports to take into account system issues when doing so that the system in which they work can also learn from what has gone wrong in this case and try to mitigate that to avoid it happening in the future. So the system issues or human factors was also a big recommendation, I would say, of the campaign.
Perfect. Well, the recommendations sound great, Patrick. Obviously, the campaign is in its early stage, but it's great to hear that that's the direction of travel. And just to circle back, you mentioned diversity, and you mentioned that you might touch on that again. Perhaps you could touch on that. Was there, I think when we've spoken before, and I know the answer to this, so it looks like a loaded question, were there any of the findings that did surprise you when you were doing the research?
Yes, I think so. So I think as part of the Expert Witness campaign first wave, we issued the policy papers with the recommendations, and we started engaging with different organizations to try and encourage, again, that pool of experts. As a second part of it, like everything we do at the moment, we have a strong focus on diversity, equality, and inclusion. So we wanted to know, what is that pool of experts made of? How many doctors are women versus men? How many doctors are white versus from BAME backgrounds? And we put an FOI with the GMC to reveal the diversity data of the experts they use. And it was really surprising. I think we expected white doctors to be the majority, and they were. I think the number was 67%. We expected Black doctors and Black English doctors to be the minority, perhaps not as much as they were. It was less than 1% of experts they used. But I think the real shock came with regards to gender. 86% of the experts used by the GMC are men versus 11% women, and the remaining 3% did not disclose their gender. So I think we were shocked. I was personally shocked by this number because we know that women are now, for the first time in the register, actually this year, surpassed men. But in terms of the total register, I think it's 47.53. So it's almost 50% of those working or registered with the GMC are women, and therefore seeing only 11% are experts was a big shock to all of us, I think.
Yeah, and that was the GMC stats. Did you manage to get any similar stats for Ireland, Patrick?
We didn't manage to get any stats from the Medical Council, so unfortunately all we can base diversity on is the GMC. We've tried to put similar requests with other public bodies, but it's quite difficult to record, I think, to get the data. So thankfully the GMC did give it to us. We also met with them, and we know they are trying to encourage also a wider and more diverse pool of experts. I guess there is a piece there, which is, what are we all doing to try and recruit, if that's the right word, experts from different backgrounds. So it's not a criticism of their data, but rather an analysis of, it is shocking. We all should be playing a role in improving that diversity.
Well, Patrick, hopefully the recommendations put forward in your campaign will encourage more members to get involved. It will encourage a wider pool of experts generally, and perhaps also a wider mix of the expert pool as well. I'd just like to say thank you so much for being part of this podcast. As I said before, I obviously have a claims background. From my point of view, experts are essential, so anything we can do to encourage our members to think about this work is to be welcomed. And I would hope as well, from speaking to a lot of experts over my career, that a lot of them will find that a really rewarding part of their career. So hopefully that will also be of interest to a lot of people in terms of their own career prospects. And so with that, we reach the end of today's podcast. Thank you again for your time, Patrick. You've heard from Patrick Canedo, and in our next episode, we'll hear more about what it is like being an expert witness from one of our colleagues who is a doctor and who is themselves an expert witness. I would encourage all members that are keen to learn more about becoming an expert witness to use the links in the podcast description to the register for our upcoming webinars, and they're going out live on May 10th and May 24th. So thank you again. Until next week, I've been your host, Sara Grewar. Speak soon.